Yep, our last presentation of the evening, ODE Learning Recovery and Extended Learning Plan. I'll turn it over to Mrs. Aug and Mr. Creighton.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birding, members of the board. Keep blaming you, Mrs. Lane. No, okay. So on February 9th, during his press conference, Governor DeWine asked school districts to create plans to make up for any learning loss that may have occurred as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. These plans should cover this school year, as well as the 2021, 2022, and 22-23 school years. The plans are due to ODE and the General Assembly no later than April 1st. It's interesting because right now, these plans are not really required, but they do expect this to be codified in legislation in the upcoming weeks. It may not even be before April 1st. So, all of our professional organizations are saying, move forward with creating these plans, making sure that they're posted. And then, ODE has said these are really living documents. So they don't expect us, in the few weeks that they gave us to have these discussions and come up with the plans to live by that for the next 3 years. So, what we have today is something that can be modified moving forward based on needs. And so what we do, this summer and next school year might look very different from what we do next summer and the following school years. So this is something that can evolve over time. So although the learning plans and ESSER funds are not specifically linked together, many districts will use ESSER 2 and possibly ESSER 3 funds to help fund these plans. So like Mrs. Lane said, we will continue to work on those details. When Governor DeWine introduced the idea of learning plans, he suggested districts consider things like extending the school day or the school year or beginning the new school year earlier. He also said summer programs, tutoring, and also remote learning options could be considered as well. So adding hours to the school day or days to the school year is not a practical option for us or most other districts. So our plan is really focused on summer offerings and what we can do in addition to what we are already doing during the school day and during the regular school year. So there are two components that they want districts to address in these plans. One being academic need and the other being social emotional needs. So from the beginning, we have worked under these assumptions. So we assume that all students were impacted by the pandemic in some way and to varying degrees. We assume that our student groups, our students with disabilities, our English learners, our economically disadvantaged students, specific ethnic groups, homeless, transient population, may have been affected more significantly. We also know that Fairfield City Schools already have significant supports in place to address academic and social emotional needs. And we have been so lucky to be partially face-to-face or fully face-to-face this school year. And like Mr. Smith said, we are doing these things already in our classrooms every day. We also know that the district will use data to determine needs of students and what additional supports will need to be put in place. And this is what might lead to our plan changing over time as we look at those different data points and as other things emerge about our students and the effects of the pandemic. We also know that we have great partnerships with Butler County ESC, with Hamilton County ESC, with mental health services in the region in order to help us address some of these student needs. So, like I said earlier, Fairfield already has significant supports and processes and resources in place. And because we have been in either a hybrid or face-to-face model all year, we've been using many of those resources throughout the school year to identify and address student needs. Moving forward, we will continue to use data to identify learning needs and social emotional needs of our students. I've listed several things here. I won't read those to you. These are things that we already have in order to help us track academic achievement and student growth in our district. So clearly we have access to student data, but that data is not useful unless you do something with it. At the district level, we use it for many things. We use it for our improvement plan. We use it to identify achievement gaps for student groups. We use it to help plan professional development. In the classroom, teachers use data to identify learning gaps, measure progress toward goals, and to guide instruction. It's important for any district to have a framework that supports the use of data for ongoing improvement. And Fairfield City Schools has had this in place for many years, but COVID put a serious strain on this framework. We simply have not been getting together to intentionally discuss data like we have in the past. It was difficult to get groups of people together due to social distancing, due to sub shortages. So the district leadership team and some building leadership teams have not been able to meet as regularly as they would in a typical school year. So we believe, especially in talking to the principals, that this systems breakdown is something that we can easily improve on next year. And I wanted it in our plan because we think this will make a difference. We have to return to that framework. It's in place, it's there. We just have to recommit to it. So, once we recommit to this, we will be having those, regular intentional conversations around data in order to identify those student gaps and student needs. So first, I thought I would talk about summer school and our plan for summer of 2021. So our plan for this summer is to expand K-5 summer school. This is something we wanted to do last year. We were already talking about it because we really wanted to include math tutoring component in our summer school for our K-5 kiddos. But because of COVID, all of those plans went out the window. So we can now have those conversations again. So our plan for this summer is to offer half-day, full-day, and even a virtual option for our families for K-5 summer school. We'll be able to focus on both reading and math intervention, but the students will also engage in STEM activities, physical activities, games, et cetera, throughout that extended school day. For grades 9 through 12, we want to offer a no-cost credit option, no-cost credit recovery option for students. There has always been a charge for summer credit recovery courses, and this keeps many students from participating in that. So we want to remove that barrier in order to get as many students back on track for graduation as possible. And of course, when we talk about moving forward with both of these plans in 22 and 23, we'll make that decision based on the success of this summer and, of course, the availability of funding. The real focus of our conversations has been around what we can do differently during the school day, within the regular school year, that will have the greatest impact on student learning. We would like to expand our before and after school offerings. So, for example, we currently run a STARS camp that focuses on reading for kids K-3. We would like to look at expanding that for our elementary students and also include math tutoring option for that. You know, that's another program that typically starts in the spring before testing. We want to look at starting things like that, you know, in the fall or once, you know, we get back to school. Same for grades 6 through 8. We would like to start to offer tutoring in the fall versus in the spring. I'll just be honest. In the past, a lot of our after-school offerings have been focused on testing, preparing for testing, intervening for testing purposes. So, you know, in our discussions, we have said, gosh, it would be great to really have something that really starts much earlier in the year. So let's get through the first round of MAP testing. Let's use that to help us to identify some of those students that really need intervention, and let's try to start intervening then, you know, with an after-school tutoring option. We also believe that including more support during the school day is essential. This will really allow us to target our neediest students. You know, as you might imagine, so many of our kids cannot attend before or after school programming due to other commitments or lack of transportation. So we need to think about how we can help them during school hours. So we would like to employ academic tutors to work directly with students. We'd also like to add additional credit recovery labs at Fairfield Freshman School and the high school if needed, again, to get students back on track for graduation. So just a note about those academic tutors, kind of a name we made up for them. They would be similar to our EL tutors that we hire. They would be on one-year contract. We could hire them hourly. Because again, with this ESSER funding, we have said we don't really want to create permanent positions because that funding is finite. I mean, it will run out, and so we don't want to create something that we can't sustain over time. But we feel like we can benefit from having certified teachers or these academic tutors working with students in the building. So that was something we were really excited about, the possibility of doing that with this ESSER funding. We also believe the shutdown affected our efforts at increasing student readiness for the ACT. This is something that we had started last year. We did our best to carry that forward into this school year and continue to prepare for the ACT, but we want to be intentional that that remains one of the focal points in our plan. So we want to make sure that we're working with our partners to continue to expand offerings for our students. And then, of course, as you learned from my other presentation tonight, we are planning to offer a virtual learning option for students next year, and this is something that would be evaluated yearly based on need. Finally, I think it's important to note that our plan will include ongoing professional development as needed. And that, again, will be determined based on the needs of the student. You know, maybe we need more training for our English learners and how to meet their needs. Maybe it's how to meet the needs of special education students. We will have to determine that moving forward, but we would anticipate using some of that money to provide professional development for our teachers. So, in some ways, you know, COVID has presented new challenges for us to address. We've certainly had to learn new ways of teaching and learning, but the reality of a teacher's life is that this is what we do. You know, we take every child in front of us and we ask, you know, what does this child need to learn and grow? And then we use our resources to make sure that they can reach their fullest potential. That's what we do, and I know that that's what our teachers have been doing all year, and they will continue to do that regardless of whether ODE requires a plan of us or not. So, I feel like we are in a very good spot. Our students at Fairfield City Schools are very lucky to be here, and that we've been in session the majority of the year. And then, I'm looking forward, to getting more of them back in session and, really addressing those needs. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. Crapo. Sorry, I feel like it's 90% Mandy Ogg and 5% Mr. Crapo. Sorry, Mr. Crapo. I was a social studies teacher.
So addressing the social and emotional needs, we are excited to be able to focus on the whole child with this and to use the funds to include the social and emotional aspect of the students and what they need. The first piece that we would like to offer is social workers. So social workers are a great resource for our secondary students, a great resource for all students, but our secondary buildings will have the option to now have access to a social worker. A social worker, in essence, is a therapist that you don't have to go through insurance. You don't have to wait for an intake to take place. You don't have to meet on Friday at 2 o'clock when you might have an issue on Monday at noon. A social worker is that person you can go to before you go to the assistant principal or administration when you got in trouble for making a bad decision. And so we are looking to get 2 social workers for the high school and continue our 1 social worker at the academy for our students. And again, this is a huge buffer between the everyday classes and the administration. It allows the student to talk on a daily basis to a professional. And then next is Panorama. So we use Panorama this year as a screener, as a tool for our students in grades K through 5. This is awesome because we're working with the ESC, and other districts in the county are finding the importance of Panorama, and they're using it as well. So the ESC is able to get consortium pricing on this, so it's going to be significantly cheaper this next year because of the districts that's coming together to use it. We are looking to offer the Panorama screener for grades 3 through 8 next year to all the students. So the students will take the screener twice a year. The reports will be mailed to the parents, and then based on the screeners, the teachers will have access to tools as well as the counselors so that they can teach towards the needs of the students based on the screener. So we're identifying the needs. That's your basic screener, but Panorama offers the tools to teach towards those needs. So that's the 2 areas, the social emotional aspect. And again, we love this because we're able to get to the whole child this way, not only with Mandy's academic portion, but the mental health piece. So,
Okay, any questions? Mrs. Shorter?
Yes, I do have a question for you, Mr. Crapo, and then one for Mrs. Ogg. Let me go back to my, hang on. Okay. Under social worker, you mentioned 2 full-time social workers will be placed at the high school. Just wondering, are those assets going to be targeted from the Butler County ESC, since these are ESSER funds and they're limited? So this is
Contracted service.
contracted.
It would not be employees of the district.
Okay.
Sorry, Matt.
And, okay. And how many years are we? 3 years?
the ESSER funds are good for 2 years. We can use
2
those
years.
for 2 years, and then we'll see what ESSER, if there is an ESSER 3, what we can do.
And right now, the one social worker that Mr. Crapo mentioned that's at the academy is paid for by a grant through Butler County Mental Health Board, I believe, right now. So general fund monies are not being used for that position right now, and that's a contracted position also.
Okay. But the ESSER funds will be used for those 2. Got it. Okay, and that's a 2-year thing there, depending on ESSER 3. One question about the Panorama. So this is a social and emotional screening tool? Okay. Do we know, So is this something that's been used in other districts that are local, or is it, because I've never heard of it, so I'm just curious about what this is.
Well, we used it this year, but also, so on the call that I was on this last week, it was, and I don't know all the districts, there's people on there I didn't know, but I do know Lakota, Hamilton, Monroe, us. We're on the call with the ESC. It's just a great tool because it not only offers the screener, there's a lot of screeners out there, but it gives the resources to the teachers and the counselors where they can teach towards the needs.
Okay, and so can you possibly send some specifics about what types of things are asked for this panorama? I really would like to know a little bit more about what's, what's being screened for or asked. I'd like to understand this a little bit better.
Sure.
So right now I have like just a plethora of things that are running through my mind about what you'd want to look for K through 5 in addressing social and emotional needs. I mean, does it,
It's three to five, I'm sorry, we're going 3 to 5.
3 to 5?
And then 6 to 8 as well.
Okay. And so is it something that would fit the majority of kids? Because we have so many kids with different socioeconomic needs. And so what's happening with one group of kids who are, kids who are possibly enrolled in our virtual program, where their parents may be at home with them, versus another set of kids where there's not as much support, and those economic factors. I'm just wondering if that screener is the type of tool that takes these differences into account. Is it a one-size-fit-all, or is it just?
There's a large question bank that we'll work through. This was enacted before I got here, so we've already done this. The only difference is we're adding 6, 7, and 8 to the program, but we will select various questions around topics. So we'll pick topics of interest from Panorama, so we'll go through, and then there's numerous questions underneath to pick out. When the students take it, it'll form a picture of what that individual child's needs are.
And I can speak to it just a very little bit. It asks very developmentally appropriate questions. So it's, measuring or asking questions around, like, does the student feel like they belong at school? Do they have a sense of belonging? Another category that it measured in the past was like their grit, their stick-to-itness. And so they ask them questions so that they can, just formulate this picture, does this child have a sense of belonging in school? Does this child show grit? It's those types of things that they're looking at. It's really kind of a whole child health and wellness assessment.
Yeah,
But we do get to choose the category. So, it's not limited to 5 categories, and we're going to use those 5 categories every single year. So it does give you that flexibility to pick and choose, and then it gives the parents a report, your child demonstrates that they have grit. What does this mean? So, and then if they wouldn't demonstrate that, it might give them some feedback on how they might build that in their child. And then the program has a separate kind of curriculum piece where it's really activities and different things that the teachers can go in. They might look at their class and say, oh no, my kids really don't demonstrate grit. And here are, several lessons for them to choose from that they can do with the whole group. It could be their morning meeting time where they can incorporate a certain activity to help build that grit in their kids. So that's just a little bit that I know and remember from last year, so.
Okay, so it's a tool for really the parents and teachers to basically take and, decide for themselves as to how they want to address those issues. It's not something that's going to be fed back into, social supports that are within the district. Like if you get a child that has a low screening level, and you may determine that there's something significant there, would that then be fed back into?
I think, and we started doing this a few years ago, and it really allows our teachers and sometimes parents to have an awareness of something that they may not otherwise have picked up on, that may stand out in these survey results. And so, as a result, parents and teachers can start to dialogue about those concerns. Guidance counselor can be involved, and they may end up maybe in a small group as a result of that as well. So it's very beneficial. Sometimes, some kids are very talkative, and they're happy to share, a lot of things with our staff members. Sometimes they are not. So sometimes we learn about things like that in some of these screeners, and it's been very helpful. So, but yeah, it definitely could result in sitting down and having some conversations with counselors, maybe being in a small group. It's definitely a possibility.
And we've been doing this for 3 years?
I don't know the exact number of years. We've been doing it for a while. I think it may have been a small part in the presentation a while ago, and part of our mental health movement and work that we're doing with counselors. I feel like it may have been
I think it came with the when the counselors
embedded in
presented.
one of the counselor presentations that we've had over the years. But we will certainly send that out to the board, some information, so that you can get a better feel for it.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Do you have any other questions? You said you had another question, maybe for Mrs. Aug.
Well, yeah, somebody else wants.
That's okay.
to go. Yeah, I can, okay.
That way Bob doesn't have to move the camera.
Okay. All righty. So I do want to have just a couple of questions, I guess, about our MAP scores. As it pertains to identifying academic needs, are we going to be able to differentiate between typical loss, that summer bridge, those summer losses, and losses that might be more attributed to the pandemic? Is there some way that we can kind of screen down on that data, looking at the subsets from fall, winter, spring? Are we going to be able to kind of pan out what's a true pandemic effect versus just typical summer loss?
So the company, NWEA, that's the owner of MAP, they have done some of this work for us, and they have actually put together, we call it the COVID slide sheet. That's probably not the official MAP name for it. But, and they've also, put out quite a bit of research and guidance, kind of like a white paper on, how to understand your current MAP scores. So that's been ongoing, I would say, since late fall, and we have Mr. Beidelman in my department who really oversees that, and he's even been going out and meeting with principals to help them better understand, looking at, okay, so here were your students' MAP scores, but then let's look at this COVID slide spreadsheet. Let's look at what this really means for your students. So thankfully, the company is really, trying to provide us with resources. And like I said, it's been ongoing, and I would anticipate it to be ongoing to help us to understand and differentiate exactly what you're saying. What is typical, what is COVID, and how to use those scores most effectively to determine the loss and the need.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I wish I'd seen this one first. I do. Okay.
Mr. Begley, do you have any questions?
All right. Gotcha.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Mrs. Aug, you talked a lot about summer school, right? So summer school offerings, some before and after school offerings, but then you also alluded to the fact that may not be practical for everyone, and I'm thinking that our most at-risk students, the ones that have fallen behind for whatever reason, a lack of discipline, whatever it may be, are not going to be interested, motivated to do any of those things. So as you alluded to, I think it's going to need to focus during the school day. The problem with intervention and pulling them out of the classroom is you may meet a known need that you've identified, but you're pulling them out of the classroom to do that. So the best thing I see in this report is the employed academic tutors, as you call them, to work directly with students. And I don't know, and it's okay if you're not ready to expand on that tonight, but I would like to see some expansion on that in the future, because I think that role, whoever it is, however we do it, in the classroom, even in a co-teaching type scenario, right, where they can meet those students in the classroom and tutor them right there, address the needs that we know they have through the prior testing we've done, might be our best bet. And I don't know how many we can employ, but we're going to have some funds. We're going to be able to work with Butler County ESC and Hamilton County ESC probably to acquire these whatever you want to call them, because they're not going to be employees of the district. But I think that's the key to the whole program right there, to catch up our most at-risk students.
So just a couple of things around that. Maybe I'll toss it over to Mrs. Lane. I think that the academic tutors would be similar to our ESL tutors that we hire, so they would be
They would be
through the
board
district.
approved. Mhm. They would be on one-year contracts.
Yeah.
Paid at an
For
hourly
one-year
rate
contracts,
that the
okay,
board would,
okay.
it would be on the board agenda for you to approve.
So, the other thing, and I didn't get into this, but, part of our conversation with the principals was exactly what you're saying. I mean, we're talking about how do we, during the school day, make sure that our neediest students are with our teachers, are with our most qualified educators. Because in some cases, we have students who are being pulled out, by EAs who are, qualified individuals, but they're typically delivering scripted programs. And so we're just, even having those conversations about how can we do things a little bit differently, again, putting our neediest students with our most qualified educators in the building. And we feel like, that's why we want to look at academic tutors. We want to look at restructuring some of the things that we might do in a typical day in order to put those kids together with the teachers. So the principals are, thinking through how that can work.
Okay, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. And I don't know what it looks like, right? Maybe you don't either just at this point, but I think you're definitely headed down the right path with that thought process.
Well, if you figure anything out, call me.
I will.
Any other comments, Mr. Vagley?
Sorry, I keep muting myself. This social worker, I worry about that being stigmatized by our students, right? So I don't know, I think our students are probably more comfortable talking to our SROs than they are to our guidance counselors. And when you bring social workers in, how is that perceived by your typical high school student, let's say, right? So I don't know, again, how we make that look, but I'm concerned that if the game plan or the hope is to have a high school student feel free and comfortable to walk in there and talk about their emotional needs, there's going to be a stigma if we present them as two social workers sitting in an office somewhere to be talked to.
Well, so the high school student will feel more comfortable talking with the SRO because there's a relationship there. So they've worked with Mr. Corner for quite a while. So the social worker will be housed in the high school, and the goal is, like any any person. You don't have to be a social worker. It's about relationships. So with the social worker being housed in the school itself, in the brick and mortar, it becomes part of the school, part of the routine. And the students will build that relationship. They'll be part of the day. Just like at the academy. I mean, it's been a very successful program over there, giving the opportunity for a child to talk to someone without having to go through insurance and schedule an appointment. And again, that starts with relationships, and it just builds into the day.
And I'd just like to add, I think you said it well, Mr. Crapo, think of every person in the building as a staff member. And so that person becomes a part of the staff. And what's great about kids, you can't apply one statement to every single student, right? But they don't think much about it when they see a student walk into a guidance counselor's office. They don't think much about it when they see a student walking into assistant principal's office, or to the office of the school resource officer, or to the office of a social worker. That's just part of a daily routine. They just see kids going different places and talking to different people. What's great about that, you brought up a great point about our SROs. We have some kids who will choose to talk to the SRO over a guidance counselor, and that's okay, because then that SRO will have some conversation with the guidance counselor or with an administrator, call the parent, all of those types of things. But the important piece is that the student is talking to someone. And we've had great feedback about the social worker at the academy. And I suspect it may be slow getting out of the gate because suddenly you have a new staff member. But kids will start to, engage with that new staff member, and then next thing you know, that staff member becomes a part of the daily routine and is building relationships and just becomes a person that works here. Just like our security staff at the high school. We have a ton of kids who talk to our security staff here at the high school, an absolute ton. And they tell them things they're not telling anyone else. So it's another option for kids, another touch point, another person that they might connect with. So hope that helps.
Would they have another title besides social worker? They would have badge say social worker and their nameplate says social worker. Would they be called liaison something or other? Or is there another title they could be given maybe to get rid of that stigma of that name?
I don't know about the title. I know it's a license, so there would be a licensed social worker. That's the license that they've earned. But as far as a title, they're going to be a person that assistant principals are going to be referring kids to them. I don't know what the actual title would be, but I don't know what the academy calls the social worker.
I think
So
that-
on the daily, I just glanced down at my badge because I never really look at it. It just says Billy Smith, Fairfield City Schools. Just thinking about the day-to-day in our buildings, our staff members generally say, go see Mr. Smith, go see Mrs. Jones, go see Mrs. Lane. They don't refer to other employees by titles most of the time. So, and I know that when we have, there's some offices down on the first floor with some counselors. They have some office space there, and I think it just says, Mr. Birding, Mrs. Shorter, and I think that's it. So, yeah, I don't think that. I think we can work through those kinds of things for sure.
I think the beauty of our high school is so large. We have so many employees, so many students that I think the social workers will just kind of blend in, honestly. And also, I don't think there's as big of a stigma about talking to people anymore as there was even 5 years ago.
Especially in the last year.
Yeah, and so I don't think that's going to be really an issue. I think it's going to be welcomed addition to the staff. I think the staff will be happy that maybe also they could, because, students also talk to teachers. And so that this might give a teacher an option to not pass them off on someone, but refer them to someone more qualified to talk to, and then they can refocus their efforts on getting the kids caught back up academically. So I don't see it as being that big of a deal to other students. I don't think.
Yeah, and I wasn't meaning the person itself, just that name.
Right.
But if
Yeah.
it's just Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith.
Yeah,
Right.
Ms. John,
absolutely.
I mean, that's fair. That's
We have
fine.
more than 3 times the number of therapists this year than we've had last year, and they're full. So
Yeah.
their caseloads are absolutely full.
Yeah,
So it's, I mean, there's a need.
yeah, absolutely.
But even I think about our SROs, we don't refer to them as go see Officer Harrington, or, it's go see Mr. Harrington. He's down the hall on the third door on your right, type thing. So,
And when we had the social workers coming in through the Butler County Job and Family Services, this was during Jerome's tenure, weren't they called student success liaisons? There was a term, liaison was in the name, so you're right, liaison was definitely in the name. I just can't remember the full.
Yeah, so we still have student success liaisons, but they do different things. They just kind of work behind the scenes to support kids and families. Nancy, am I saying that right? They're not here in the building physically every day, or like in a building, maybe they are, but they're just, they work with a lot of our support agencies to pull in resources for families.
Okay,
Yeah,
They remove barriers.
yeah, remove barriers.
okay. But they're licensed social workers.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, I see. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, the 6 and 7 slide or page addressing learning gaps, again, those, I'm excited to see the options for catch-up. And like Ms. Aug said, do it, to address it earlier in the year instead of at the end of the year, I think is outstanding. To get fall help instead of spring help when the school year's almost over, I think that's excellent. I think that was it, just to implement what we talked about and what we said before. You all do such a great job, have passion and desire and brainstorm different ways of helping the kids, because it is all about the kids. And this is great catch-up, as Mrs. Shorter had talked about, getting these kids caught up. It's very, very important. And I think this is a step, whether it changes or it modifies a little bit, we got something, we got a map to get somewhere.
Any other questions or comments? I love this outline. Of course, it can only be as successful as the parents allow it to be. We need a lot of parent involvement in the recovery process. I hope they don't just rely on the schools to make up all the recovery, because it definitely is going to take some involvement from our parents to say, thank you for helping my child. How can I help you help them? And I'm hope that they can do that. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for presenting tonight. I know that was a lot, but it was very important information that we needed to get forward with. So, okay, we will move on to communication, and no one has signed up to speak or wanted to wait around this long to speak. So